Sofia Romano had exactly 4 seconds to understand what she was looking at. Her fiancé's hands, the same hands that slid her engagement ring on 3 months ago, were buried in Elena's hair. Not a stumble, not a mistake. A choice. Deliberate and deep behind the door he thought was locked at his own engagement party. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She reached into the doorway, picked up the champagne glass sitting on the side table, and drank it slowly. Every drop. Then she walked back toward the ballroom. Before this story goes any further, if you're watching from home right now, drop your city name in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay until the very end, because what happens to Sofia tonight will change everything you thought you knew about walking away. Now let's go back to where it all began. 7 years, not 7 months, not 7 seasons of good intentions and slow drift. 7 full years of Sofia Romano's life poured into one man, one future, one version of herself that she had slowly, carefully, and completely built around Adrian Blake. She had been 24 when they met. Young enough to believe that love was enough. Stubborn enough to hold on when it wasn't. She had worked beside him when he was building his consulting firm from a rented desk in a shared office space. She had made calls for him, proofread his proposals at midnight, driven across the city to deliver contracts when his assistant quit without notice. When investors laughed at his early pitch, Sofia had been the voice in the parking lot afterward, telling him to go back inside and try again. She had believed in Adrian Blake before Adrian Blake believed in himself. And now she was standing at the edge of a ballroom crowded with 200 guests. People in designer suits and expensive perfume crystal glasses. Catching the chandelier light, staring at the man she thought she knew, and watching him become a stranger in real time. The engagement party had been Elena's idea. Of course it had. Elena Marsh had been Sofia's closest friend for 11 years. They had met in college, shared an apartment for 2 years after graduation, called each other on birthdays and bad days, and every important moment in between. When Adrian proposed, Sofia had called Elena first. Not her mother. Elena. She had stood in her kitchen laughing and crying at the same time, and Elena had said, "Oh my God, Soph, I'm so happy for you. He's lucky to have you. He'd better know that." He'd better know that. Sofia had replayed those words maybe 100 times in the weeks that followed. She had taken them as love, as loyalty. She understood now, standing with an empty champagne glass and a chest full of broken things, that they had been something else entirely. A performance. An act so natural, it had fooled her completely because Elena Marsh was very, very good at performing. The venue had been Elena's suggestion too. The Harrington, the most prestigious event space in Chicago, with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Adrian had hesitated about the cost. Elena had convinced him. Sofia had agreed because she trusted both of them. Every single detail of this night, the flowers, the guest list, the music, the placement of the tables had been arranged by the woman who was currently in the private lounge 2 floors up, with her hands twisted in Adrian's collar. Sofia set the empty glass down on the nearest surface and breathed. Around her, the party continued. A string quartet played something soft and celebratory. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with trays of canapes. 2 of Adrian's business partners laughed loudly near the bar. His mother, Patricia Blake, stood near the entrance in a cream blazer, scanning the room with the calm expression of someone who had already decided how this evening would be categorized in memory. No one was looking at Sofia. That was the thing that hit her first. Not the image behind that door, not the specific shape of the betrayal, but the realization that she was standing in the middle of her own engagement party, and not a single person in this room had noticed she had been gone for 11 minutes. She had gone upstairs to fix a strap on her dress. She had been walking back down when she heard a door that wasn't quite closed. She had paused because she recognized the shoes outside it. Elena's shoes, the ones she had complimented 2 hours ago, gold strappy heels that Sofia had called stunning. They were still stunning. They were currently lying on their sides in the hallway. Sofia walked to the bar. She ordered water. Her hands were not shaking. She found that strange, not the stillness itself, but her awareness of it, the way her body seemed to have made a decision that her mind was still catching up to. The bartender handed her the glass and said, "Beautiful party." "Thank you," Sophia said. She drank half the water and thought about the ring on her finger. It was a cushion-cut diamond 2 carats set in platinum. Adrian had proposed in this same hotel, actually at the rooftop restaurant on their 4th anniversary. He had gotten down on one knee in front of 8 other tables, and the entire restaurant had applauded. Sophia had cried. Adrian had laughed and wiped her face and said, "7 years and you still cry over me. I love that." She had worn the ring every day since without taking it off once. She was looking at it now. It caught the light the same way it always had. It sat on her finger the same way. Nothing about the ring itself had changed. But every time she looked at it from this moment forward, she would see those shoes in the hallway. She would hear the particular sound of a door that wasn't fully latched. She would remember that Adrian had kissed her on the cheek 2 hours ago and said, "You look beautiful tonight," and then gone upstairs. The water glass was cold in her hand. She set it down. Then she heard him. "Sophia." Adrian's voice. Quiet, careful, angled specifically to carry without turning heads. She had heard him use that voice in business negotiations, the one that sounded reasonable, even when he was offering something that wasn't. He had appeared at her left shoulder, and she could smell Elena's perfume on his jacket. She didn't turn around. "Sophia, listen to me." "I'm listening," she said. He moved to stand beside her at the bar. His expression was controlled. She knew that expression too. She had watched him use it in difficult meetings, when a client pushed back, and Adrian needed a moment to recalibrate. He had a gift for controlling rooms. It had impressed her once. Right now, it made her feel like she was being handled. "What you saw. I know what I saw." "It's complicated," he said. "Things between us have been... It's been complicated for a while, Soph. You know that." "No," she said. "I don't know that." He exhaled. His hand moved toward her arm. She stepped sideways just slightly, not dramatically, not with visible anger, just enough to make the point, without announcing it to the room. "Elena and I," he started. "How long?" Sophia said. He paused. "How long, Adrian?" Another pause. She counted 4 seconds. 7 months, he said. She felt the number land. 7 months. Which meant it started 4 months before he proposed. Which meant the ring, the knee, the restaurant, the applause. All of that happened while Elena Marsh was already a secret. He had asked her to marry him while lying to her face. She pressed her lips together, breathed once through her nose. "I want to explain," he said. "You don't need to," she said. "I understand exactly what happened." "Sophia, did you invite her tonight because you were planning to tell me here, or because you weren't planning to tell me at all?" Silence. There it was. She saw it move across his face, not guilt exactly, but the specific discomfort of someone whose plan had been interrupted before it was finished. He hadn't been planning to tell her tonight. He had been planning something else. She didn't fully know what yet, but she felt the shape of it pressing against the underside of the question. "What were you going to announce tonight?" she asked. "After dinner. You said you had an announcement." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "I was going to end the engagement," he said. Sophia turned and looked at him for the first time since she'd come back to the bar. His face was the face she had memorized over 7 years. The jaw, the eyes, the particular way he held his mouth when he was stressed. She knew every version of this face. She had thought that meant she knew him. "Here," she said. "You were going to end it here, in front of all of these people." "I thought." "You thought what?" "That a public setting would soften it, that I wouldn't cause a scene if there was an audience." His jaw tightened. "I thought it would be easier." "For who?" He didn't answer, and that specific silence, with 200 people 10 feet away, and a string quartet playing something that sounded almost like a waltz, was the moment Sophia Romano understood the full picture. Not just that Adrian was in love with Elena. Not just that the engagement was over. But that the man standing in front of her had calculated her grief down to a location and audience size. He had factored her heartbreak into a logistics problem and solved for his own comfort. She looked down at her hand. The ring caught the light one more time. She took it off. It came off easily, It always had. Her knuckles were slim, and she held it in her palm for a moment. The diamond was cold. Everything about this night was cold now, but the ring most of all. She set it on the bar between them. "Keep it," she said. "Sophia, I don't want it back. I don't want anything back." She picked up the water glass again, just to have something to hold. "I want you to go find Elena and finish whatever you were doing. I want you to make your announcement. I want you to do every single thing you planned for tonight." "Sophia, please. But you will never have me again," she said. "Not even a conversation, not a phone call, not a text that says I'm sorry when you decide to feel guilty next month. You don't get access to me anymore, not for any reason." She set the water glass down. Her engagement ring sat on the bar in the light, and it was beautiful, and it meant absolutely nothing. She walked away. She did not hurry. She kept her shoulders level and her chin up, and her steps even as she moved through the ballroom past the business partners at the bar, past the caterers, adjusting trays near the kitchen entrance, past Patricia Blake in her cream blazer, who turned and watched with an expression Sophia couldn't read and didn't try to. She collected her coat from the front desk without speaking. She pushed through the front doors of the Harrington and stepped into the November air, and then she stopped, because there was nowhere to go. She had arrived tonight with Adrian. Her car was in the valet lot attached to his ticket. Her apartment, the one she had shared with him for 2 years, had his name on the lease. Her closest friend in the world was upstairs in a private lounge. The life she had organized around this man had no emergency exit that was only hers. She had given so much of herself to the structure of their relationship that she had not noticed how little of the foundation was actually her own. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Harrington in a navy dress and heels, with 11 degrees of Chicago November wrapping around her bare arms, and she had never felt more alone in her life. The valets were too far away to be in earshot. A taxi rolled by without stopping. Across the street, a couple walked quickly past in winter coats, not looking at her. She didn't cry. She wanted to. She could feel it right behind her sternum, the particular pressure of grief that hasn't found its shape yet, enormous and shapeless and waiting. But she did not cry on the sidewalk outside the Harrington, because crying felt like giving the night something else it didn't deserve. She opened her clutch and found her phone. She was going to call a car service. She was going to go somewhere. Her mother's house. A hotel. Anywhere that wasn't here. She was unlocking her phone when someone spoke from 2 feet to her left. "You forgot your coat." She turned. The man standing there was holding a cashmere coat that was clearly not hers. It was charcoal gray, obviously expensive, and at least 3 sizes too large for her. He was looking at her with an expression that was not quite concern and not quite curiosity. It was something calmer than either of those things. Steady, the way a room feels after the loud noise has stopped. "That's not my coat," she said. "I know," he said. "It's mine. You looked cold." He was holding it, not in the gesture of someone who expected her to take it, but in the gesture of someone who had simply offered a reasonable solution to an obvious problem and was prepared to wait while she decided. She looked at him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, in a dark suit that had not been purchased off any rack. Dark hair, early 40s, a face that had probably never been described as warm, but was in this particular moment doing something that functioned like kindness. She did not know who he was. She took the coat. It was still warm from him. She pulled it over her shoulders without putting her arms through the sleeves, and the cold dropped away immediately. "Thank you," she said. "Of course." He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't fill the silence with noise. He simply stood there, which was something Sophia found so unexpectedly considerate that she almost laughed. "My fiancé is inside announcing his engagement to someone else," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way things do when you've been holding them for too long. "So I'm standing out here calculating whether my coat deposit is worth going back in." The man said nothing for a moment. Then, "Is it?" "No," she said. "Then you made the right call." She looked at him again. There was something about his stillness that was unusual. Most people in an awkward situation shifted their weight, their eyes, their expression. He didn't. He simply existed in the space with the same calm authority that she associated with people who had never needed anyone's approval to feel secure in a room. "I'm Lorenzo," he said. "Sophia," she said. "I know," he said. She frowned. "How?" "Your name is on the board inside. Sophia Romano and Adrian Blake. Engagement celebration." He paused. "I have a meeting in this building tomorrow morning. I came early to review the layout of the space." It was such a precise and practical explanation that she almost smiled. "Were you invited to the party?" "No," he said. "Then you're standing outside a party you weren't invited to." "So are you," he said. That landed. She turned it over. He was right. She had just voluntarily exiled herself from her own engagement party, which made them technically equal in their exclusion from the Harringtons' ballroom tonight. She laughed. It was small and startled, and not at all the kind of laugh that belonged to this evening, but it was real. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I'm going to be." She said it before she'd fully decided it was true. But the moment it left her mouth, something in her chest shifted just slightly, just enough that she felt it, like a knot loosening by 1 degree. "That's the important part," Lorenzo said. A car appeared at the curb, black, substantial, not a rideshare. The driver got out immediately and came around to open the rear door without being signaled. Lorenzo looked at her. "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet," she said. He considered this. Then, "There's a hotel 2 blocks from here. Clean, quiet, run by people who mind their own business. My driver can take you." "I'm not getting in a car with a stranger," Sophia said. "You're standing on a sidewalk in November holding a stranger's coat," he said. "The car is marginally warmer." She looked at the open door. She looked at him. "You're not coming." "No," he said simply. "You don't know me. You don't have any reason to trust me. I'll call ahead to make sure they have a room." She handed his coat back. He took it without comment. "Thank you," she said. "For the coat, for the car offer." "You don't have to take it." "I know." She had already opened the Lyft app on her phone. She ordered a car. It was 4 minutes away. "I'm going to my mother's." He nodded. "Sophia," he said, before she had fully turned away. "Whoever was in that room tonight, you were the only person who behaved like themselves. That's not nothing." She didn't answer. Her car was pulling up. She got in without looking back. But in the back seat, alone in the dark with Chicago moving past the windows, she turned his words over. "You were the only person who behaved like themselves." She had not screamed. She had not begged. She had not threatened Adrian or thrown something or given the room the scene they were probably halfway hoping for. She had taken her ring off, set it on the bar, and walked out. No performance. No production. Just the truth of what she felt moving through her body and out into the world as quietly as it could. She pressed her head against the cold window glass, and finally, in the back of a stranger's Lyft, driving toward her mother's apartment on the north side of the city, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just steadily, the way water moves through stone, slow and patient, and without any particular intention of stopping until it had gone all the way through. She cried for the 7 years. She cried for the ring. She cried for Elena, who had sat on her couch 11 years ago and helped her move boxes and met her for brunch on Sunday mornings and said, "I'm so happy for you. He'd better know that." She cried for the version of herself who had never questioned any of it. And then, somewhere on the dark highway between the Harrington and her mother's building, she stopped. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the city moving outside the window. She thought about a man with a cashmere coat who had stood on a sidewalk and said, "You were the only person who behaved like themselves." She didn't know his last name. She didn't know what meeting brought him to the Harrington the next morning. She didn't know why his stillness had felt like a hand on her shoulder when nothing else that night had. But she remembered his face, calm and dark and entirely unhurried. The face of someone who had long ago made peace with difficult things and had come out the other side of that peace knowing exactly who he was. She thought she might like to know his last name. She thought that was a strange thing to think tonight of all nights. She let herself think it anyway. Her mother's lights were on when the car pulled up. Rosaria Romano appeared in the doorway before Sophia had even paid the driver. She must have been watching from the window, which meant someone from the party had already called. Sophia felt a fresh wave of exhaustion at the thought of who might have made that call and what they might have said. But her mother didn't ask questions at the door. She simply pulled Sophia inside, took her coat and said, "Sit down, I'm making tea." "Mom." "Sit down, Sophia." She sat. The kitchen smelled like it always had garlic and something sweet. A candle her mother kept burning on the counter year-round. Rosaria moved around the kitchen with the particular efficiency of a woman who showed love through action rather than words. And Sophia watched her and thought about all the times she had sat in this kitchen over the past 7 years and talked about Adrian. How good he was. How hard he was working. How much she believed in what they were building. Her mother set 2 cups of tea on the table and sat across from her. "Tell me," Rosaria said. So Sophia told her. All of it: the shoes in the hallway, the door that wasn't latched the particular way Adrian had said. It's complicated in the voice he used for difficult business negotiations. The 7 months, the ring on the bar, the sidewalk, the strange man with the cashmere coat. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Sophia finished, Rosaria wrapped both hands around her teacup and was quiet for a moment. "The man on the sidewalk," she said finally. "He gave you his coat." "He offered. I took it for a few minutes." "And then he offered his car." "Yes." "And you didn't take it?" "I didn't know him." Her mother nodded slowly. "What did he look like?" "Mom?" "I'm just asking. I don't know. Tall. Calm. Like someone who has never been nervous in his life." Sophia wrapped her hands around her own cup. "He said I was the only person who behaved like myself tonight." Rosaria looked at her. "He was right." "I know. You've always been the one who behaved like yourself, Sophia, even when it cost you." Her mother's voice was careful and deliberate. "Adrian is going to call. Elena might call. People from that party are going to have opinions. I want you to be ready for that." "I'm not ready for it." "I know, but you will be." Sophia looked at her tea. "I don't know what happens next." "You don't have to know tonight." "I feel like I should have seen it." "You trusted people who didn't deserve it," her mother said. "That's not a failure of your judgment. That's a failure of their character. Don't mix those up." Sophia nodded. She felt the exhaustion of the night pressing down on her shoulders like something physical. The adrenaline that had kept her upright since the hallway was finally releasing, and underneath it was just grief. Plain, heavy, enormous grief for everything she had believed and everything she had lost. "Can I sleep here tonight?" she asked. "Your room hasn't changed," her mother said. She went to bed in her childhood room with the old curtains and the familiar creak of the floorboards and the distant sound of Chicago traffic outside, and she lay in the dark for a long time without sleeping. She thought about the 7 years. She thought about Elena's laugh, which she had trusted absolutely. She thought about Adrian's face when she put the ring on the bar, not devastated, not guilty, but recalibrating. Already recalibrating. And then she thought without meaning to about Lorenzo. She had no reason to think about him. She had met him for 5 minutes in the cold. He was a stranger who had been decent when she needed it, which was not nothing but was not a lot either. But she kept returning to the stillness of him. The way he had offered without pressing. The way he had looked at her as though her pain was real and valid and didn't require management. She had spent 7 years being managed. She turned toward the wall and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would figure out the apartment. The lease, the things she had left there. The practical disaster of extricating her life from a life she'd built with someone else. Tomorrow she would decide what to do about the calls that were already waiting on her phone. Tonight she was just going to exist in her mother's house, in her childhood room, with the curtains that hadn't changed, and the floor that still creaked, and let herself be the person who had walked out of the Harrington with her head up and her ring on a bar. She had done that. Whatever came next, she had done that. It was the first time in 7 years that something she had done felt entirely completely her own. She woke up at 4:47 in the morning and knew immediately that she wasn't going back to sleep. Not because of noise, not because of discomfort. Her mother's house was as quiet as it had always been, And the bed she had slept in since childhood still held the particular softness of something that had formed itself around her body over years. No, she was awake, because her brain had finished grieving for the night, and moved without her permission directly into logistics. The apartment. She needed to think about the apartment. She and Adrian had signed a 2-year lease together. Her name was on it too, which meant she had rights. She wasn't sure she wanted to exercise in a space she was certain she could no longer inhabit. Her clothes were there. Her books, her professional files, the laptop she needed for work, the coat she had bought in October that she actually loved. All of it sitting inside 4 walls that now felt like a trap she had walked into voluntarily and decorated with her own hands. She sat up in bed and reached for her phone. 14 missed calls. 3 from Adrian all before midnight, which told her he had tried, and then when she didn't answer, made a calculation about the cost of continuing to try. 2 from numbers she didn't recognize, which meant guests from the party, which meant the story was already moving through the network of people who had been in that ballroom. 1 from Elena. She stared at Elena's name for a full 30 seconds. Then she set the phone face down on the mattress and got up to make coffee. Her mother was already in the kitchen. Rosaria Romano was 61 years old and had been waking before 5 for as long as Sofia could remember, a habit from the years she worked double shifts at the hospital before retiring, a rhythm her body had never unlearned. She was standing at the counter in her robe with her own coffee already made, and she looked at Sofia the way she always had, not with pity, but with the particular sharp attention of someone who was measuring how you were holding up without asking. "You didn't sleep," her mother said. "I slept some." "Sit down." Sofia sat. Her mother poured coffee without being asked and set it in front of her, black, the way Sofia had taken it for years. "What are you going to do about the apartment?" Rosaria asked. "I was thinking about that." "Your sister has a pull-out couch." "I know. Or you stay here. Your room is your room." "Mom, I'm 31. "I know how old you are, Sofia. I was there." Her mother sat across from her. "What I mean is, you have options. You're not trapped." That word landed differently than her mother meant it. Sofia wrapped both hands around the mug and thought about trapped, about the specific shape of the life she had been living for 7 years, how completely she had woven herself into Adrian's infrastructure. His apartment, his social circle, his events calendar that she had managed from her own phone because he forgot things, and she had always been the one who remembered. She had been indispensable to his life, and he had replaced her anyway. "I need to go back to the apartment," she said. "Not to stay, to get my things." "When?" "Today, while he's at work." Her mother nodded. "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Rosaria's voice was quiet and final. "I'm coming anyway." They went at 10 in the morning, when Sofia knew Adrian's calendar had him at a client presentation on the north side. She still knew his schedule. She probably would for a long time. 7 years of someone's rhythms didn't disappear overnight, and she found herself both grateful for the knowledge and furious that she had memorized him so thoroughly. She had a key. She used it. Walking into the apartment felt like walking into a version of herself that had already died. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The throw blanket folded over the couch arm, the way she always folded it. Her books on the left side of the shelf. The photo of them in Portugal 2 years ago still on the kitchen counter in the frame she had picked out. Adrian had not moved anything. He had not erased her yet. She found that worse somehow than if he had. Her mother stood in the living room and said nothing, while Sofia moved through the space with a focused efficiency that surprised herself. Clothes first, then files. Then the things that mattered in the specific way that ordinary objects matter when they're the last remaining evidence of who you were before something broke. The photo from Portugal she left. The throw blanket she took. She didn't have a clear logic for these decisions. She just moved through them quickly before the logic became necessary. She was packing the last bag when she found the envelope. It was on the kitchen counter behind the coffee machine, the kind of spot where Adrian left things he considered handled bills. He'd paid forms. He'd filed matters that were technically finished. Her name was on the front in his handwriting. She opened it. Inside was a check. $50,000 made out to Sofia Romano with a note clipped to it that read, "For any inconvenience." I hope this helps with the transition. A. She read the note twice. For any inconvenience. She held the check in her hand and felt something move through her that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite the cold, clean clarity that had carried her through last night. It was something older and deeper than all of those things, the specific recognition that someone who had known you for 7 years had in the end understood you not at all. He thought she would take the money. I thought she could be settled. Transitioned out. Compensated for inconvenience. She put the check back in the envelope. She left the envelope on the counter exactly where she had found it, directly in front of the coffee machine, where he couldn't miss it. She picked up her bags. "Ready?" her mother asked from the doorway. "Yes," Sophia said. She didn't look back. The following week was the kind of week that didn't announce itself as hard. It arrived quietly in the form of ordinary things that no longer applied the grocery list she'd been running in her head for a household that wasn't hers anymore. The Tuesday dinner reservation she'd made for 2 at the Italian place. Adrian liked the automatic way. Her hand reached for her phone every morning before remembering there was no one she needed to check in with. She was staying at her sister Julia's apartment, a small warm place in Wicker Park, crowded with plants and mismatched furniture, and 2 cats who judged everyone. Julia was 35, sharp-tongued, and the only person in Sophia's life who had never fully trusted Adrian Blake. She had been careful about it, not openly hostile, never unkind in front of Sophia. But there had always been a reservation in Julia's eyes when Adrian walked into a room, a faint pause before she laughed at his jokes. Sophia had interpreted this as Julia being difficult. She understood now that it had been something else. "I always thought he was performing," Julia said on the 3rd morning over coffee, and without preamble, the way Julia always said everything. "Like always performing. You could never just catch him being ordinary." "You never said that. You were in love with him. What was I going to say?" Sophia looked into her cup. "You should have said it." "Maybe," Julia said. "But you wouldn't have heard it. People don't hear that about people they love. It goes in one ear and gets translated into jealousy before it even lands." She paused. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying this is not about your judgment being wrong. This is about a very good performer." Sophia thought about that for a long time after Julia left for work. She had been replaying the 7 years, compulsively lifting moments out and holding them up to the light of what she now knew, looking for the places where she should have seen it. The trip to Italy 2 years ago, where Adrian had been on his phone more than usual, which she had attributed to work stress. The Saturday 3 months ago, when Elena canceled their lunch with an excuse that was vague in a way Sophia had not interrogated. The slow decrease in small intimacies. His hand at her back, the way he used to reach for her in the car, that she had told herself was just the natural settling of a long relationship. 7 months. He'd said 7 months. She kept doing the math. Every memory she lifted got cross-referenced against that number. Every moment she had trusted, measured against the calendar of what had actually been happening while she was trusting it. It was exhausting, and it was pointless. And she kept doing it anyway because she couldn't yet figure out how to stop. On Thursday, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then she thought about job calls she might be expecting, professional contacts who might be reaching out, and picked up. Sophia Romano. A beat of silence. Then, "This is Marco. I work for Mr. Vescari. He wanted me to make sure you arrived safely the other evening, and to apologize that he didn't ask before that night." She sat up straighter. "Mr. Vescari," she said. "Lorenzo Vescari. From outside the Harrington." She was quiet for a moment. "He sent someone to call me." "Yes. He said he realized he hadn't introduced himself properly and wanted to correct that. He told me his first name. He also wanted to know if you needed anything. He didn't want to assume, but he asked me to make the offer." Sophia thought about the check Adrian had left on the kitchen counter. For any inconvenience. She thought about the distance between that and this. A man she had met for 5 minutes, sending someone to ask without expectation if she was all right. "I don't need anything," she said. "Please tell him I appreciate it." "Of course," Marco said. One more thing, Mr. Vescari asked me to tell you that if you ever want to have coffee and talk, the invitation is open. No obligation. Coffee, she said. He said you seemed like someone who had a lot to figure out, and that was easier with decent coffee than without it. She almost laughed. That's either the most sensible thing or the strangest thing anyone has said to me this week. Mr. Vescari tends to operate in both categories simultaneously, Marco said, and she could hear the faint trace of a smile in his voice. She said she would think about it. She hung up and sat for a long time looking at her phone. Lorenzo Vescari. She typed the name into her search browser without entirely meaning to. The results came back fast, and they were not what she expected. Not because they were alarming, though some of them were. Not because they were dramatic, though there was plenty of that. But because the picture that assembled itself across the first several results was so much more complicated than the man who had stood on the sidewalk and offered his coat with no expectation of anything in return. Lorenzo Vescari, 52, was the head of a private investment firm with holdings across real estate, hospitality, and logistics throughout the Midwest. That was the official accounting. The non-official accounting, referenced in 3 investigative journalism pieces from reputable outlets and 1 federal filing that had been ultimately dismissed, suggested something else. A network of influence that went significantly deeper than investment portfolios. Connections to organized interests that the city's political establishment had spent 15 years pretending not to acknowledge, a name that moved through Chicago's power structures the way a current moves under still water, invisible on the surface, shaping everything beneath it. She read for 45 minutes without stopping. And then she sat back and thought about the man on the sidewalk. The stillness. The coat. The offer of the car that had come with absolutely no pressure to take it. The phone call through a proxy offering coffee with no obligation. Nothing about what she had read felt consistent with what she had experienced. And yet nothing about what she had experienced felt inconsistent with what she'd read either. That was the part that was hard to sit with, that both things could be true at once, that a man could be exactly as complex as the distance between those 2 pictures suggested. She closed the browser. She would not call. She would not accept the coffee invitation. She would not insert herself into a situation she didn't understand with a person she had no framework for in a week when she already had more than enough wreckage to sort through. She made that decision clearly and firmly. She lasted 6 days. It wasn't weakness that changed her mind. It wasn't loneliness, though she had plenty of that. It was something that happened on a Wednesday afternoon that pushed her firmly and without ceremony out of the managed safety of Julia's apartment and into the kind of conversation she had been avoiding. She ran into Patricia Blake at a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, Adrian's mother. The encounter was not accidental. Sophia understood that the moment she saw Patricia, already seated, already watching the entrance, already holding a coffee that was clearly not her first. Patricia had been planning to be there. She had known somehow where Sophia would be, probably through the same informal network that had gotten a call to Rosaria Romano within 2 hours of Sophia walking out of the Harrington. "Sit down, Sophia," Patricia said before Sophia had decided whether to acknowledge her. She sat, not because she owed Patricia Blake anything, because she was tired of fleeing. "I want to explain," Patricia said. "You don't need to explain your son to me. I want to explain what I knew." Patricia wrapped her hands around her cup. She was a precise, controlled woman, had always reminded Sophia of a very expensive piece of machinery that ran without visible effort. "I knew about Elena. I found out 2 months ago." Sophia felt the information settle into her chest. "And you didn't tell me?" "No." "Why?" Patricia looked at her directly. "Because I believed Adrian was going to end it on his own. I pushed him too. I told him every week for 2 months that what he was doing was wrong and that he needed to tell you the truth before it became something worse." She paused. "I was wrong to believe him. I know that. And I was wrong to protect him instead of telling you myself." Sophia looked at the woman who had almost been her mother-in-law. She searched for something, rage probably, or hurt, the particular kind that comes from discovering that someone who was supposed to be on your side had made a different calculation. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve it to hear it, and because Adrian is not going to tell you." Patricia's voice did not waver. He has already begun rewriting the story. He is telling people that your relationship had been declining for some time, that the engagement was a formality you had both outgrown, that what happened at the party was unfortunate but mutual. Sophia heard the construction of it, the careful language, the reframe that made it something that had happened to both of them equally, rather than something he had done to her. She felt it physically like a door closing. He's good at that, Sophia said, rewriting things. He learned from watching me do it, Patricia said. I'm not proud of that. She set her cup down. I'm also going to tell you something that you may not want to hear. Elena's family has money. Real money. Old Chicago family connections that Adrian has been cultivating for 3 years. This was never entirely about feelings. It was also about access. Sophia went very still. He planned this, she said. Not a question. Not all of it, but some of it. Patricia looked at her hands. The engagement to you, I don't believe that was planned. I believe he loved you in the way he is capable of loving someone. But when Elena became available, Adrian made a decision about which future was more valuable to him. And he made that decision before he had the honesty to tell you. The world outside the coffee shop was moving at its ordinary speed. People passing on the sidewalk, cars in the street, November, continuing to do what November always did. Why did you come here, Patricia? Sophia asked. Not to apologize. You didn't come to apologize. What do you actually want? Patricia looked at her for a long moment. I want you to know that what happened was his failure, she said, not yours. And I want you to know that people in this city have long memories. What Adrian did the way he did it will follow him. Not immediately, but it will follow him. That's not enough for me. I know. And it's not why you came. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, Elena's father is Jeffrey Marsh. He sits on the board of 3 organizations that Adrian has been trying to break into for 2 years. This marriage will open those doors for him. She paused. It will also put him in the middle of a family whose internal dynamics are significantly more complicated than they appear. Jeffrey Marsh is a man who owns the people connected to him. Adrian does not understand that yet. Sophia looked at her. You're not warning me, she said slowly. You're warning him. Through me. Because you think I still have some influence over what happens to your son. Patricia did not deny it. And that specific silence in a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, with November pressing against the windows, was the moment Sophia Romano finished grieving Adrian Blake. Not because she stopped feeling anything. She would feel things about him for a long time. Anger and grief, and the particular exhaustion of having loved someone who had not been worth what it cost. But the grief that she was finished with was the kind that still hoped for something. The kind that kept a small room open just in case. She stood up. I hope your son knows what he's walking into, she said. But that's not my concern anymore. She left. She was 2 blocks from the coffee shop when she took out her phone and found the number Marco had called from the week before. She stared at it for a moment. She thought about the choices she'd been making since last Friday. The ring on the bar, the apartment, the envelope with the check, and now this. She had been making decisions by walking away from things. It had been the right call every time. But at some point, walking away from things was not the same as walking toward something. She called the number. Marco picked up on the second ring. Ms. Romano? Tell him yes, she said. To the coffee. A pause. I'll let him know. When would work for you? She thought about Julia's apartment, the pull-out couch, the cats, the life she was rebuilding from scratch in someone else's space. Tomorrow, she said. Whenever is convenient for him. I'll have an address sent to you within the hour, Marco said. She put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. The wind off the lake hit her face, and she let it. She wasn't warm enough for November without a proper coat, and she didn't care. She had left her good coat in Adrian's apartment and had gone back for everything else, and not for it, and she was going to need to buy a new one, which was just one more item on the long list of ordinary things that would need to be rebuilt. She was already making the list. That was something. The address Marco sent was a restaurant she had walked past dozens of times, but never entered. Small Italian on a quiet block in River North, with a discreet sign and no visible prices in the window. The kind of place that existed for people who didn't need to know the prices before they sat down. Lorenzo was already there when she arrived. Of course he was. He struck her as a man who was always already there, who arrived early as a matter of principle, who would no sooner be caught rushing in apologetically than he would be caught without something to say. He stood when she approached the table. Not as a performance, it was quick and natural without ceremony. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for the invitation," she said. They sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and she expected the silence to be awkward, the silence of two people who had met once under strange circumstances and were now performing a version of normal that hadn't existed yet. But wasn't awkward. It was the same quality of stillness she had felt outside the Harrington. Like being in a room where someone had turned the noise down without turning off the sound entirely. "How are you?" he said. "Better than last week," she said. "Worse than I'd like." "That sounds about right." "I looked you up," she said, because she had decided she was not going to pretend she hadn't. He didn't blink. "I assumed you would." "The things I read were complicated," he said. "Some of them were more than complicated." "Yes." He held her gaze without flinching. "I'm not going to tell you that everything you read was wrong. Some of it was. Some of it wasn't. I'm not going to pretend my life is simpler than it is, and I'm not going to tell you things designed to make you feel comfortable that aren't true." She watched him. Most people would have led with the denial. "Most people aren't being honest with you," he said. "I'd rather you leave this lunch knowing exactly what I am, and make a decision based on that, than have you stay based on a version of me I constructed to be palatable." She looked at him across the table and thought about Patricia Blake 2 hours ago. The careful construction, the strategic reframing the information offered in the specific configuration that served a purpose. She thought about Adrian, who had been performing being good for 7 years, with such skill that she had never once clocked it as a performance. "Why did you have Marco call me?" she said. "Because you were standing on a sidewalk in November, and you looked like someone who had just had their world taken apart," he said. "And I didn't do anything about it in the moment except offer a coat. I thought about that afterward, and I didn't like how it sat." "You could have done nothing. We were strangers." "Yes." "So why didn't you?" Howe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you didn't cry out there. You came out of a room where you'd just had your entire life dismantled, and you stood on that sidewalk without crying, without calling someone, without doing any of the things that people do when they're in shock and trying to look like they're not. You were just present, in it. And there was something about that that I didn't want to walk away from without at least acknowledging." The waiter brought water. Neither of them looked at the menu. "I'm not looking for anything," Sophia said. It felt important to say it clearly. "I'm not in a place where I'm looking for anything." "I know," Lorenzo said. "I'm not offering anything. I'm having coffee." She almost smiled. "This is a restaurant." "I'm having coffee in a restaurant," he said. "With someone who seems like they could use a conversation that doesn't require them to perform being fine." She looked at him. She thought about the week she'd just had: Julia's couch, her mother's kitchen, 14 missed calls, Patricia Blake across a coffee shop table, the check for $50,000 left behind a coffee machine like a transaction. "I'm not fine," she said. "I know." "I'm angry," she said. "I thought I was sad, but I think the real thing underneath is angry. He spent 7 months lying to my face and then left me a check like he was buying out a lease." Lorenzo's expression shifted, not visibly dramatic, just a slight change in the set of his jaw. "He left you a check. 50,000 for inconvenience. What did you do with it?" "I left it on the counter." Lorenzo looked at her for a moment. "Good. Was it, maybe I should have taken it?" "You could have," he said. "It would have been within your rights, but I suspect taking it would have felt like signing something." "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it felt like." They were quiet for a moment. The restaurant was not crowded. It was barely noon, and the lunch rush hadn't fully arrived, and the quiet felt comfortable in a way that surprised her, given that she was sitting across from a man whose name had appeared in federal filings. "Tell me something true about you," she said. "Not from the articles. Something they wouldn't print. He thought about it. She liked that he thought about it instead of answering immediately. I've kept the same 3 employees for 22 years, he said. People who came to me when they had nothing. I've watched all 3 of them build families, put kids through college, buy homes. That matters to me more than most of what goes on my calendar. She looked at him. Why? Because loyalty is the only thing I actually trust, he said. Not contracts, not agreements, not the kind of promises people make in rooms full of witnesses. The kind of loyalty that shows up quietly over time without requiring a reason. She thought about Elena. 11 years. Brunch on Sundays. You're the most important person in my life after my family. I understand that, she said. I thought you might. The waiter came. They ordered not because they were particularly hungry, but because the conversation had found a rhythm, and neither of them was ready to break it. They talked for 2 hours. Not about Adrian. She had said what she needed to say about him, and Lorenzo did not press. Not about whatever the federal filings had been about. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask. They talked about her work. She was an interior designer with a small firm currently on uncertain footing because 2 of her major client relationships ran through Adrian's social network, and she wasn't certain how those would hold. They talked about the honest version, which was that he managed a network of interests that required him to understand human nature at a level most people never needed to. They talked about Chicago, about what it meant to build a life in this city versus being born into one, about the difference between power that people could see and power that actually moved things. She was more honest with him in 2 hours than she had been with anyone in the past week. She wasn't entirely sure why. Something about the way he received information without judgment, without trying to fix it, without the particular discomfort that made people reframe your pain into something more manageable for them. When she got up to leave, she was not the same version of herself that had walked in. Not dramatically changed. Not saved or fixed or redirected. Just slightly less compressed. Like something that had been held tightly had been allowed to exist at its actual size for a few hours. Thank you, she said at the door. Don't thank me, he said. You did the work. She paused. What work? We had lunch. You said what was true instead of what was easy, he said. Most people can't do that when they're this close to something that hurt them. You did it the whole time. She looked at him. You're going to say something that makes this sound like less than it is, she said. Yes, he said. I'm going to say that you should get a decent coat. Chicago in November doesn't negotiate. She laughed genuinely cleanly for the first time since she'd stood on the sidewalk a week ago. She walked back to Julia's apartment through the November cold without a good coat, and she was not thinking about Adrian. She was not doing the math of 7 months or lifting memories out to cross-reference them against what she now knew. She was just walking in the cold in the city as herself. She stopped at a store on the way home and bought a coat. Navy, which was her color, which was nobody's choice but hers. She wore it the rest of the way home. The coat was the first thing she had bought entirely for herself in longer than she could accurately calculate. Not for an event. Not because Adrian had a function she needed to look appropriate for. Not because Elena had commented that navy was her color and she had filed it away as something someone else noticed about her. She had walked into the store, looked at the coats, and chosen the one she wanted, based on nothing, except that it was the right weight and the right color, and she liked the way it felt when she put it on. She wore it home in the November cold and didn't think about Adrian once. That was the first time that had happened since the Harrington. She noticed it the way you notice the absence of a sound you've stopped hearing only when it's been gone long enough for the silence to register. She was halfway through Julia's front door when she realized that the entire walk back she had been thinking about the coat, about Lorenzo's face, when she laughed about the specific way he said you did the work, as though he genuinely meant it and wasn't packaging it as a compliment. She had not been running the math on 7 months. She had not been lifting memories. She had not been performing even in the privacy of her own head, the version of herself who was still standing in a hallway outside a party, looking at a door that wasn't fully closed. She had just been walking. It seemed small. It was enormous. Julia looked up from the couch when Sophia came in and said, "New coat." Yes. Good color. I know. Julia looked at her for a moment longer than usual. She had the particular perceptiveness of someone who had spent a lifetime watching people she loved, and she used it without announcing it. You look different, she said. I had lunch. With who? Sophia set her bag down and sat in the chair across from her sister. She had thought about how to frame this on the walk home and had not arrived at a clean answer, so she chose the direct one instead. Lorenzo Vescari. Julia said nothing for 2 full seconds, which was unusual for Julia, who almost never paused. The Lorenzo Vescari. I don't know how many there are. Sophia. I know. He is not. Julia stopped, recalibrated. How do you even know him? I met him outside the Harrington that night. He was there for a meeting. He gave me his coat for a few minutes and offered his car, and I said no. Then he had someone call to check on me. Then he invited me to coffee. Julia stared at her. And you said yes. I said yes. To Lorenzo Vescari. Julia, I had lunch with the man. I didn't sign anything. Her sister picked up her coffee mug, looked into it, set it down. This was Julia's version of composing herself, which she did not often need to do. What was he like? Sophia thought about how to answer that. She thought about 2 hours at a table in River North, and the specific quality of being received without being managed, and the way he had said, I'd rather you leave this lunch knowing exactly what I am, than stay based on a version of me I constructed to be palatable. Honest, she said. In a way I didn't expect. Honest men in his position don't stay in his position. I didn't say he was simple. I said he was honest. She looked at her sister. He told me up front that some of what I'd read about him was true. He didn't try to explain it away. Julia was quiet for a moment. Then, be careful. I know. I mean it. Not because he's dangerous, I don't know if he is or isn't. But because you're 3 weeks out from the worst night of your life, and you had a good lunch, and that can feel like more than it is when everything else feels like less. Sophia looked at her sister and thought about how much she loved her, and how frequently love looked like someone saying a thing you didn't particularly want to hear. I know, she said again. And she meant it differently this time. The weeks that followed moved faster than she expected, which was either a mercy or a warning, and she didn't spend too much energy deciding which. She found a sublet, a 1-bedroom in Lincoln Square. Small, but entirely hers, with walls she could put things on, and a kitchen that didn't carry the ghost of a life she was trying to unlearn. She signed the lease on a Tuesday, and spent 3 days moving in boxes she had accumulated at Julia's. By Friday, she was sleeping in her own bed, in her own apartment, for the first time since the engagement, and she lay on her back in the dark, and breathed, and felt the specific relief of a space that owed nothing to anyone else's choices. Her work was the harder problem. She had 3 active clients when everything fell apart. 2 of them she had come to through Adrian's network, a developer couple who had hired her based on Adrian's recommendation, and a corporate hospitality firm whose principal was a golf friend of Adrian's from before she and Adrian had met. Within 2 weeks of the Harrington, both had sent polite emails that used the words direction change and reassessing our needs in ways that meant something else entirely. She lost both accounts in the same week without a direct conversation from either of them. The 3rd client she kept. She kept it because the woman who had hired her, Diana Reeves, a 60-year-old retired physician who had hired Sophia off a magazine feature 3 years ago, called her directly and said, I heard what happened. I don't care about any of it. I care about the design. Are you still working? Yes, Sophia said. Then we continue. And frankly, Sophia, if you're looking to rebuild your client base, I have friends who are tired of designers who do what their husbands want. I'll make some calls. Diana made some calls. 2 new clients inside of 3. Both women, both in their 50s, both with strong aesthetic opinions and checkbooks to match. Not enough to fully replace what she'd lost, but enough to keep moving, which was what mattered. She and Lorenzo had coffee again the week after the restaurant, and then again the week after that. They developed a rhythm that was not quite friendship and not quite anything else. Conversations that covered more ground than small talk and less ground than confession. Honest without being deliberate, easy in the way that things are easy when nobody needs them to be something specific. She learned things about him in pieces. He had been married once. His wife Camille had died 12 years ago from an illness that moved faster than anyone predicted. He had a daughter, Ava, who was 26 and lived in New York and designed buildings for a living, and called her father twice a week with a regularity that he described as her way of checking whether he was still human. He had been running his network in some form since he was 29, which meant it had been more than 2 decades of a particular kind of weight that she was only beginning to understand. He did not ask her about Adrian in these conversations. She brought Adrian up once the lawyers had contacted her about a formal dissolution of their shared assets, a conversation that had required her to review documents covering 7 years of entanglement, and Lorenzo had listened without offering an opinion, which she was learning was his particular form of respect. He did not tell her what to feel. He did not tell her what to do. He simply made the space for her to think out loud, without populating it with his own conclusions. It was she realized the thing she had needed most that nobody had known how to give her. It was also she was honest enough to acknowledge making it very difficult to maintain the appropriate level of caution about the man. The pivot happened on a Thursday in December. She was in her office, a shared studio space she rented with 2 other designers on the near north side working through revisions on a residential project, when her phone buzzed with a news alert. She almost ignored it. She had been ignoring news alerts for weeks, training her phone to understand that she did not currently need to know what was happening in real time. But this one had Adrian's name in the headline. She tapped it. The article was from the Chicago Business Journal. It was short, almost clinical in its precision. Adrian Blake's firm, Blake Consulting, had been named in a preliminary civil suit filed by a former client alleging misrepresentation of investment projections. The suit was in early stages, and the language was careful. Alleged claimed sources familiar with the matter, but the specifics were pointed enough that she read the piece twice. The former client was a mid-size manufacturing company that had hired Blake Consulting 18 months ago. The suit alleged that projections Adrian had presented to their board were manipulated to justify a recommended acquisition that had subsequently lost the client almost $3 million. The acquisition had been structured to benefit a third party with undisclosed ties to Blake Consulting. Sophia set her phone down. She thought about what Patricia Blake had told her in the coffee shop. Adrian is not going to tell you. He has already begun rewriting the story. And then the thing Patricia had actually come to say, Jeffrey Marsh is a man who owns the people connected to him. Adrian does not understand that yet. She picked her phone back up and called Patricia. It rang 4 times. Then, Patricia's voice controlled as always, but with something underneath it that Sophia hadn't heard in 7 years of Sunday dinners, and Christmas mornings, and obligatory birthday calls. Fear. You saw the article, Patricia said. When did you know? A pause. About the client suit a week ago. And about whatever Jeffrey Marsh is actually involved in. The pause this time was longer. Not until recently. Patricia. Sophia kept her voice even. What is he in the middle of? I don't know the full extent of it. What I know is that the suit is the beginning, not the end. The client who filed, they have documentation. Not just of the projections, of the communication trail. Emails, Adrian's calendar, meeting logs. She stopped. Sophia, there are emails on that trail that reference you. Everything went quiet. Reference me how? Sophia said. Your name appears in at least 3 communications as a way of establishing credibility with the client. Adrian used your reputation in the industry, your client relationships, your professional standing to make the arrangement seem more legitimate than it was. Patricia's voice had lost most of its precision. She sounded for the first time in Sophia's experience of her like someone who was genuinely frightened. You weren't involved. Your name was used without your knowledge, but your name is in there. Sophia gripped the phone. Her name. In documents. In a fraud case. Used without her knowledge as a prop in a scheme she had nothing to do with by a man she had spent 7 years defending. How bad is this? She said. The suit is civil, not criminal, at this stage. But Sophia Jeffrey Marsh has resources Adrian doesn't understand. If Jeffrey decides it's in his interest to let this expand rather than contain it, why would Jeffrey let it expand? Adrian is marrying his daughter. Another pause, the longest yet. Elena broke off the engagement, Patricia said. 4 days ago. Sophia sat very still. Elena broke it off, she said. Yes. Why? I don't know everything. But what I know is that Jeffrey Marsh did not get to where he is by attaching his family to liability. Patricia's voice was barely above a murmur now. Adrian is a liability, and Jeffrey cuts liabilities. Sophia thought about Elena, about 11 years of friendship, about the shoes in the hallway and the lock that wasn't latched. About the woman who had smiled across the ballroom of the Harrington like she had won something, and who had apparently discovered within 6 weeks that what she'd won was a man standing in the path of an incoming disaster. She thought about the check on the kitchen counter. For any inconvenience. She felt something move through her that was not satisfaction. It was not petty enough for satisfaction and not clean enough for relief. It was something older and more complicated. The feeling of watching someone walk very confidently in a direction you recognized and had already left. What do I need to do? She said. About my name being in those documents. You need a lawyer, Patricia said. A good one. Not one of Adrian's contacts, someone entirely separate. And you need to be prepared to give a statement clarifying your non-involvement if the suit broadens. All right? Sophia. Patricia stopped. Started again. I'm sorry. I should have told you 2 months ago. I should have come to you instead of trusting Adrian to do the right thing. I know that apology is inadequate. It is, Sophia said. But I hear it. She hung up. She sat for a moment in the shared studio with the city moving outside the windows. And then she did something she had not done yet in 6 weeks of careful, deliberate rebuilding. She called Lorenzo. Not Marco. Lorenzo directly. She had his number now. It had appeared in her phone after their third coffee, without explanation, just a contact labeled LV, with a number as though he had simply decided she should have it, and the how of it was not something that required discussion. He picked up on the first ring. Sophia. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to be honest with me the way you were the first day. A beat. All right. Adrian's firm is in a civil suit. My name is in the documentation used without my knowledge to establish credibility for something I had nothing to do with. She kept her voice even. You know people in this city who know things. I need to know how bad this is going to get. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone who needed time to think. It was the silence of someone who was choosing how much to say. How quickly do you need to know? He said. As quickly as possible. Give me 24 hours. Lorenzo. Sophia, 24 hours. She exhaled. Okay. She spent that night at her kitchen table, reading everything she could find about the civil suit and Jeffrey Marsh and the former client company, and the specific mechanics of what Adrian had apparently done. She was not a lawyer. She understood some of it and not all of it. What she understood was enough to know that her name being in those documents was not a small problem, even if her involvement had been zero, that in the specific social and professional ecosystem she inhabited, proximity to something like this could do damage that legal innocence didn't fully repair. Lorenzo called at 9 the following morning. Here's what I know, he said without preamble. The suit is real, the documentation is solid, and the former client has more evidence than what's been filed so far. They're holding some of it. Standard practice. You file the opening, see how the other side responds, and you use what you're holding as leverage in the negotiation. So they'll try to settle. Probably. But Jeffrey Marsh is not going to let this settle in a way that costs him anything. Which means Adrian is going to be the one bearing the weight of the resolution. He paused. Your name in those documents, the lawyer who files your statement of non-involvement, needs to be someone with standing in this city. Not just competent. Known. Someone whose name on the filing signals that you have resources and are not going to be swept into a settlement as background collateral. Do you know someone like that? I know several, he said. I'm going to give you a name. You call him yourself. This has to be your engagement, not mine. But when you call, you can tell him that you were referred by me." She wrote down the name, Martin Calloway. She looked it up after the call and found a litigation firm on LaSalle Street with a client list that read like a directory of everyone in Chicago who mattered and occasionally found themselves in complicated situations. "Lorenzo," she said before she hung up. "Yes." "Why are you helping me with this?" The pause was brief. "Because you're being held responsible for something you didn't do by someone who used your name as a prop while he was lying to your face. That's not a situation I'm able to watch from a distance and feel good about." She didn't say anything for a moment. "That's the honest answer," she said. "Yes," he said. "There's also the part where you're one of the only people I've talked to in years who doesn't want something from me. That makes me want to be useful to you in ways that are actually useful, rather than the ways people expect me to be useful." She thought about what that meant, the ways people expected Lorenzo Viscari to be useful. She thought about what it cost to be the person everyone came to when they needed something moved or resolved or made to disappear, and what it felt like to spend an afternoon in conversation with someone who had not arrived with an agenda. "I'm going to call Martin Calloway," she said. "Good. And I'm buying lunch next time." "I'll allow it," he said. She called Calloway that afternoon. He was in a meeting, but his assistant took her name and called back within 40 minutes, which told her that the referral had already made its way through some invisible channel between the phone call and the callback, and that Lorenzo's name still moved through this city with a specific kind of authority. Calloway was direct, efficient, and expensive. He told her exactly what she needed to do in plain language that didn't require translation. A formal affidavit of non-involvement, a proactive statement to any journalists who contacted her, and documentation of every project she had worked on independently of Adrian's network going back 3 years. He told her he could have the affidavit filed within a week. "Will it be enough?" she asked. "It will establish the record clearly," Calloway said. "What people choose to believe is always a separate question from what the record says. But we control the record." She left his office feeling the specific exhaustion of someone who had spent 2 hours doing something unpleasant and necessary, and the specific clarity that came after. She texted Lorenzo Calloway was good. "Thank you." He texted back, "I know." She laughed at her phone standing on the sidewalk, which was becoming a habit she didn't entirely mind. The gala invitation arrived 10 days later. It came through a professional channel, the Chicago Design and Arts Foundation, annual charity gala, held every December at the Meridian Club. The kind of event that existed at the exact intersection of culture and commerce and social posturing that Chicago did so well. She had attended twice before, both times with Adrian, both times as an extension of his professional orbit rather than her own. She almost didn't open the envelope. She had enough on her hands, the Calloway affidavit, the new clients, the sublet apartment, that still had boxes she hadn't unpacked. She did not need to attend a gala. Then she looked at the invitation more carefully. She was listed as an honoree. Diana Reeves had nominated her. The foundation was recognizing her firm's work on a community arts center project she had led 2 years ago, a project that had been hers entirely. Hers built through her own relationships and her own creative decisions and her own late nights, and that had won a regional design award she had been quietly proud of without ever making much of it publicly. She called Diana immediately. "You nominated me," she said. "I did," Diana said, unrepentant. "You did excellent work on that project. The foundation agrees." "Diana, my name is currently in a lawsuit." "Your name is in a lawsuit as an innocent party whose professional reputation was used without consent by a man who is currently watching his entire career unravel. Those are 2 different things. The foundation knows the difference." Sophia was quiet. "Come to the gala, Sophia," Diana said. "Stand up and let people see who you actually are, not who Adrian told people you were, not who he needed you to be to make his operation look legitimate. You." She accepted the invitation that afternoon. She told Lorenzo about it at their next coffee lunch this time, because she had made good on her promise and paid, which he had accepted with such grace that she suspected he had told the restaurant in advance to bill him, and then simply not informed her of that, but she let it go. "Are you going?" he asked. "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "Will you go with someone or alone?" She met his eyes. Is that an offer? He didn't look away. It's a question first. She thought about it. She thought about what it would mean entering that room, which would contain some of the same people who had been in the Harrington ballroom 6 weeks ago beside Lorenzo Vescari. Not because she needed protection, not because she needed a statement, but because he was genuinely and without complication the person she wanted to be there with. It's an offer, she said. I'm asking. He looked at her for a moment that lasted exactly long enough. Then yes, he said. What happened next she had not planned and had not let herself fully anticipate, because anticipating it felt like assuming too much, and she had built her current self on not assuming things she hadn't earned the right to assume. But the week between that lunch and the night of the gala was different from the weeks before. It quieter in the way that things are quiet when they're building toward something charged, the way air gets before weather. She worked. She met with Calloway. She took a call from one of her new clients about material samples. She had dinner with Julia, who asked about Lorenzo with the careful precision of someone who already knew the answer and was checking her own read. She unpacked the last of the boxes in her apartment and put things on the walls and stood back and looked at the room and recognized for the first time since the Harrington that this was a home, not a holding pattern, not a temporary arrangement. A home that she had chosen and built, and that reflected nothing and no one but her. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear. Lorenzo's car came for her at 7:30. He was in it, which she had half expected and half not because she was still calibrating what to expect from him, which was part of what made him interesting. He was in a dark suit, no tie, and he looked at her when she got in with the same steady attention he always brought to things, like she was something worth paying attention to without any performance around the paying of it. You look extraordinary, he said. She had worn a dress she chose herself in a deep burgundy that had nothing to do with anyone else's preference. Her hair was up. She had the navy coat over her arm. Thank you, she said. And she meant it without qualification, which was new. They didn't talk much in the car. They didn't need to. The Meridian Club was lit and crowded when they arrived, the particular density of a room full of people who had been told this was an important evening and had dressed accordingly. Sophia recognized faces, colleagues from the design world, clients, past and present, city figures she knew by sight, if not personally. And yes, there were faces she recognized from the Harrington. She had known there would be. She did not look for them. She did not position herself to be seen or avoid being seen. She simply walked in beside Lorenzo, and the room did what rooms did. It shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But she felt the attention recalibrate, the slight pause in nearby conversations, the heads that turned and registered and turned back. Lorenzo walked through the room with the ease of someone who had never needed a room's permission for anything, and Sophia matched it. She did not borrow his confidence. She found that she had her own. She was holding a glass of... She had decided she was not drinking tonight. She wanted to be entirely present when she heard Adrian's voice behind her. She did not freeze. She did not turn immediately. She took one breath and turned at her own pace. Howe was standing 6 feet away. Without Elena, she noted. He was alone in the suit he wore to things like this, and he looked exactly like himself. Good-looking, composed, performing composure, with the specific skill she had spent years failing to recognize as performance. He looked at her, then at Lorenzo, then back at her. She watched something move across his face that wasn't quite disbelief and wasn't quite regret. It was the expression of someone who had made a calculation and was now confronting the gap between what they calculated and what was actually true. He had calculated that she would be diminished by this, that without him in a room like this, she would be smaller. She was not smaller. Lorenzo said nothing. He simply stood beside her with the particular stillness that was his nature, and did not make a move toward Adrian or away from him, because this was not his moment, and he understood that. Adrian took a step forward. Sophia, he said. Adrian, she said. You look... He stopped. I heard about the foundation recognition. Congratulations. Thank you. He glanced at Lorenzo again. She watched him decide whether to address it and decide against it, which told her everything about where his confidence actually sat. "Can we talk?" he said. "At some point tonight, just briefly." She looked at him. She thought about the check on the counter. She thought about her name in his documents. She thought about 3 months ago, when he got down on one knee in the restaurant, and she had cried, and he had wiped her face, and she had believed it completely. "No," she said. "We can't. Sophia. We've already had every conversation we need to have, Adrian. I don't have any more left." She held his gaze without flinching and without cruelty. "I hope things resolve for you. I genuinely do. But I'm here tonight for my own reasons, not for a conversation with you." He stood there for a moment. She watched him look for something to say and not find it. Not because she had devastated him, she hadn't tried to, but because there was nothing in her eyes for him to work with. No anger he could reframe as lingering passion. No hurt he could interpret as needing something from him. Just a woman who had finished something and moved on to whatever came next. He nodded, once, and walked away. Lorenzo said nothing. After a moment she said, "Okay, okay," he said. They walked toward the other side of the room together, and the gala continued around them, and nobody who mattered missed a single detail of what had just happened, which was the point. Not because she had planned it, but because the truth of who she was and who she had become in the weeks since the Harrington was visible in a way she couldn't have manufactured and didn't need to. An hour later, she stood at the podium and accepted the Foundation's recognition with a speech she had prepared and then mostly abandoned speaking instead from the specific truth of what the Community Arts Center project had meant to her. Why design mattered to her. What it meant to build something that changed how people moved through a space, and therefore how they felt about it. What it meant to create something lasting in a city that had a gift for forgetting. The applause was real. She could feel the difference. Lorenzo was in the back of the room when she found him again holding a glass of water he hadn't drunk. He looked at her when she came back to him. "That was real," he said. "I know," she said. "Most people in that room tonight were performing. I know that too." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, that slight, almost imperceptible shift. She had started to learn, the one that meant he was about to say something he hadn't planned to. "I haven't felt like I was somewhere worth being in a very long time," he said. "Tonight I do." She looked at him. She thought about the sidewalk outside the Harrington. The coat that wasn't hers. The car she hadn't taken. The coffee that became lunch, that became a phone call, that became this moment in a room full of people who were watching without knowing they were watching the most important conversation of her recent life. "Lorenzo," she said. "Yes. I'm not the same person I was at the Harrington." "No," he said. "You're better." "I don't need saving." "I know," he said. "I'm not here to save you. I'm here because you're the most interesting person in this room and you agreed to let me stand next to you." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she laughed, genuinely, fully, without qualification. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. And whatever was building between them, quietly without announcement in the spaces between coffee and conversation, and one honest exchange at a time, settled into something that felt for the first time in a long time like solid ground. 3 weeks after she bought the navy coat, Sophia Romano got her first client back. Not through Adrian's network. Not through a referral from anyone who had been in that ballroom. Through her own portfolio, which she had updated obsessively during the worst nights at Julia's apartment, when sleep wouldn't come, and she needed her hands to be doing something useful. She had rebuilt her website from scratch, rewritten every project description, added photographs she had been sitting on for months, because Adrian always said the timing wasn't right to promote herself too aggressively. She had sent 12 cold emails in 1 week. 11 went unanswered. The 12th came back within 4 hours. The client was a woman named Renata H. Su, 58, recently divorced herself, redesigning an entire floor of her Gold Coast townhouse, with the particular energy of someone who had decided that every surface her ex-husband had ever touched needed to become something else. She and Sophia met for 90 minutes and understood each other completely within the first 20. "I don't want it to look like I tried to erase him," Renata said. "I want it to look like he was never here." "That's a different job," Sophia said. The first one is reactive. The second one is yours. Renata looked at her across the table. You've done this. Recently, Sophia said. Good, Renata said. Then you know exactly what I need. She signed the contract that afternoon. It was not a large project by the standards of what Sophia had been working on before. Renata's budget was real, but not extravagant, and the scope was contained. None of that mattered. What mattered was that Sophia had built it herself without Adrian's contacts, or his calendar, or his name opening doors in front of her. She had sent an email into the dark, and someone had written back, and she had sat across a table from a stranger and been good at her job, and that was all it had taken. She called her mother to tell her. Rosaria Romano said, of course, in the specific tone she reserved for things she considered inevitable, not dismissive, but certain in the way that comes from knowing someone better than they know themselves. Sophia hung up and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of her own accomplishment. Then she called Lorenzo. They had been talking regularly for 3 weeks. Not every day, not on any formal schedule, but in the organic rhythm of two people who had found each other genuinely interesting and had stopped pretending they hadn't. He called sometimes in the evenings when she was still at Julia's apartment, and the day had quieted enough for real conversation. She called sometimes during the day when something happened that she wanted to tell someone who would receive it without making it about anything else. He picked up on the second ring the way he always did. I got a client, she said. Tell me. She told him about Renata, about the cold emails, the portfolio rebuild, the 90-minute meeting, the contract. She told him about Renata's line, I want it to look like he was never here, and what she had said back to it. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment after she finished. That's the distinction, he said, between rebuilding and reacting. Most people don't know the difference when they're in the middle of it. I almost didn't. But you did. I had a useful conversation about it, she said. I didn't say anything about that, but she could hear the quality of the silence shift slightly. That was something she had learned about him over 3 weeks. He communicated as much in the pauses as in the words, and she had become, without entirely planning to, fluent in the difference between his silences. I want to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. The things I read about you, the network, the influence. Is that something that follows you everywhere, into every room you walk into? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Does it bother you? Sometimes, he said. Less than it used to. I made a decision a long time ago about what I was willing to be, and I've lived with the weight of that. What bothers me now isn't the reputation. It's when it prevents people from seeing past it. To what? To whether I'm actually dangerous to them specifically, he said. Most people make that calculation wrong. They assume the worst uniformly, rather than asking whether the worst applies to their situation. She thought about that. Are you dangerous to me specifically? The pause was longer this time. No, he said. Not in any way I can imagine, but I want you to keep asking that question. Don't stop asking it just because the answer has been no a few times. She appreciated that. She appreciated it so much that she sat with it quietly for a moment before saying anything else. I'm moving into my own place next week, she said. I found a sublet in Lincoln Park, small but mine. Good. It feels, she started, stopped. What? It feels like the first decision I've made in 7 years that has absolutely no one else's fingerprints on it, she said. Keep that feeling, Lorenzo said. Build from it. She moved into the sublet on a Tuesday. Julia helped her carry boxes. Her mother brought food that filled the refrigerator for 3 days. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, a kitchen that required careful spatial negotiation windows that looked out over a narrow side street rather than anything scenic. She loved it immediately and completely. She hung 1 piece of art on the wall the first night. Just one, a print she had owned since graduate school that had moved through 3 apartments with her and had somehow never made it onto any wall she shared with Adrian, always relegated to a closet or a storage box because it didn't fit his aesthetic. It was an abstract piece, bold and slightly chaotic, and she stood in front of it in her new space and felt something settle into place. The second week she got a second client. The third week a third. Word was moving, she understood, not loudly, but in the way that things move in professional communities where people talk over dinner. Someone knew someone who had heard about the woman who had walked out of the Harrington. Someone had seen her portfolio. Someone knew Renata Shu and had noticed the particular energy with which Renata was moving through her own renovation. Sophia was not yet where she had been. She was not yet close. But she was building, and the building was hers, and nothing about the foundation had anyone else's name on it. She did not hear from Adrian. She had expected at some point the follow-up. The phone call, or the carefully worded text, the version of, "I'm sorry." That was really, "I need you to stop being angry, so I can feel better." It never came. What came instead through the filtered information channels of mutual acquaintances was the ongoing management of the narrative. Adrian's story of a relationship that had run its natural course. Elena photographed at his side at 2 charity events. The machine of his new life, already operational and polished and moving forward. Sophia heard these things and noted them the way you note weather. Not indifferently, she was not there yet, and she didn't pretend to be, but without the destabilizing force they might have had in the first week. She heard them and put them down and went back to work. It was Marco who called her on a Thursday evening in early December with the thing that changed the temperature of everything. "Mr. Vescari wanted you to hear this from someone you trust before it reaches you another way," Marco said. "There's going to be an event next Saturday, the Caldwell Foundation Charity Gala. Mr. Blake will be there. He and Ms. Marsh are expected to make an appearance together. It will be their first formal public outing as a couple." Sophia was quiet. "Why is Lorenzo telling me this?" "Because you've been invited as well," Marco said. "The Caldwell Foundation reached out to you directly. Mr. Vescari did not arrange the invitation. I want to be clear about that. They reached out through your professional contact because they are aware of your work and are considering a redesign of their event space. But the evening will also be attended by Mr. Blake." She understood what Marco was not saying. Lorenzo had found out she would be in the same room as Adrian before she found out herself, and he had sent Marco to warn her, rather than let her walk into it without preparation. "Does he want me to decline?" she asked. "He specifically said that was not for him to advise," Marco said. "He said it was your decision, and that either choice was the right one. He did ask me to tell you one thing." "What?" "That if you go, he would like to go with you. Not as a statement. Not as he was very specific about this, not as a performance. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, 'If she wants company, I'm available. If she wants to go alone, that's stronger.'" Sophia sat with that for a long moment. If she wants to go alone, that's stronger. She thought about the Harrington, the ballroom, the 200 people, and the string quartet, and the ring on the bar. She thought about how she had walked out of that room with her head up and no audience for it, the decision made cleanly without a witness for no one but herself. She thought about what it would mean to walk back into a room like that, and what it would mean to do it with Lorenzo Vescari beside her. "Tell him yes," she said. "Tell him I'd like the company." The gala was held at the Grand Meridian, which was 3 blocks from the Harrington, and might as well have been the same building for how her body responded when the car pulled up. Her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with memory. The November air, the entrance with its columns of light, the sound of a crowd already inside, doing the thing that crowds at these events always did, which was perform being comfortable in expensive rooms. Lorenzo was waiting for her at the entrance. He was in a dark suit, not identical to what he'd worn outside the Harrington, but in the same register of quiet and expensive that said, "I belong in any room and don't need to prove it." He looked at her as she walked toward him, and something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not in the way people describe in stories, but in the small specific way that told her he had been waiting and was glad the wait was over. "You look like yourself," he said. "I've been practicing," she said. He offered his arm. She took it, and they walked in. The room was different from the Harrington in its specifics, but identical in its energy. The particular charged air of a Chicago charity event. The gathering of money and influence and carefully managed social positioning. The way the crowd arranged itself into visible and invisible hierarchies that everyone pretended didn't exist. Sophia had attended 100 versions of this room over the past 7 years. She had always arrived as Adrian Blake's partner, visible in that context, significant in that context, but always in relation to him. She was not in relation to him tonight. The first person who noticed her was not Adrian. It was a woman named Carolyn Fitch, who sat on 3 nonprofit boards and knew everyone who existed in this particular corner of Chicago society, and whose expression when she saw Sophia moved through surprise and recalibration so quickly it was almost beautiful in its efficiency. "Sophia," Carolyn said. Her eyes moved to Lorenzo, registered what they found, returned to Sophia. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "I was invited," Sophia said. "Carolyn, do you know Lorenzo Vescari?" "By reputation," Carolyn said, which was the only honest thing anyone in this room would say about Lorenzo Vescari. "Good reputation, I hope," Lorenzo said without any inflection that suggested he cared about the answer. They moved on. Sophia felt the room recalibrate around them as they walked, the specific shift that happens when an unexpected pairing enters a social space that thought it had already accounted for everyone. She felt it. Conversations slowed fractionally as they passed in the brief eye contact from people she knew who had heard the story and were now performing the experience of revising it in real time. She didn't care. That was the thing she noticed. The thing that felt different from every version of this she had rehearsed in her mind during the 3 weeks since the Harrington. She had imagined being nervous. She had imagined the performative confidence, the effort of appearing unbothered. But there was no performance required because she was in fact unbothered. The room was doing what rooms did. She was doing what she was doing. These were simply simultaneous facts. They were 15 minutes in when she saw Adrian. How was across the room, deep in conversation with Jeffrey Marsh, Elena's father, the man Patricia Blake had warned her about, the one who owned the people connected to him. Elena was at Adrian's side, her hand at his elbow, wearing something white that was calculated to announce something. Adrian was leaning slightly toward Jeffrey, in the way Sophia recognized as his active listening posture, attentive, slightly deferential, auditioning for approval. She watched him for about 4 seconds. He looked exactly the same. That was the part that was almost funny. She had spent 3 weeks being fundamentally altered by what had happened, and he stood across a ballroom, looking completely unchanged, like a man who had managed a transition rather than detonated one. Then he turned and saw her. She watched it move across his face. The recognition, the recalibration, the specific horror of a man who had written a story where she existed only in the past tense, and was now confronting the fact that she was present tense in this room, beside a man whose name he clearly recognized, because the color in his face changed when his eyes moved to Lorenzo. Sophia did not smile. She did not hold his gaze. She simply returned her attention to the conversation she was having, which was with a board member of the Caldwell Foundation who was describing with genuine enthusiasm the space they were hoping to redesign. "We want something that feels less like a reception hall and more like a home," the woman Sandra Okafor was saying. "Warmer, more personal. Something that tells the story of what we actually do rather than just where we do it." "That's entirely possible," Sophia said. "Tell me about the story you wanted to tell." She was working. In the middle of a charity gala where her ex-fiancé was 10 feet away, auditioning for his new father-in-law, Sophia Romano was working, and she was good at it. And the conversation with Sandra Okafor was real and productive and entirely independent of everything else happening in the room. Lorenzo was nearby, but not adjacent. He had moved into a conversation of his own with men who clearly knew him and clearly respected him in the specific way that people respect forces of nature, with a mixture of deference and relief that it was currently directed elsewhere. He caught her eye once across the 15 feet between them, and the look said simply, "You're fine." She knew she was fine. It was still good to see it reflected. The first real test came 40 minutes in. Adrian crossed the room. She saw him coming. She had time to decide how to receive this. She stood with Sandra Okafor and a second board member whose name she was still placing, and she felt Adrian's approach. The way you feel a change in air pressure, not dramatically, but definitely. He stopped 2 feet away. "Sophia," he said. His voice was the voice she had loved for 7 years, which was information that her body received independently of what her mind had decided about him. "Adrian," she said, "I didn't know you'd be here tonight." "I was invited." He was looking at the space around her, at Lorenzo's absence from her immediate side, probably hoping that this was something she had constructed, some performance of being fine that would crumble under direct contact. She recognized the hope on his face. She had put hope on her own face often enough to know it when she saw it. "You look good," he said. "I know," she said. He blinked. "I wanted to." He stopped. Started again. "I wanted to say that the way everything happened was not what I intended. I want you to know that." "I believe you," she said. "I believe the way it happened was not precisely what you planned. I think you planned something slightly more managed, and it got away from you." She paused. "That doesn't change what it was." "Sophia, I made a mistake. You made a series of very deliberate decisions over 7 months," she said. "One of them happened to be discovered before you were ready for it to be. That's not a mistake. That's a plan that got interrupted." He was quiet. "I don't hate you," she said, and meant it completely. "That's not what this is. I'm just not willing to let you revise what happened into something easier to live with. You don't get that from me." "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I know. You meant to transition me out of your life in a way that was convenient for you. The hurt was incidental." She looked at him steadily. "Go back to Elena. Go back to Jeffrey Marsh and whatever you're building with him. I hope it's what you think it is." There was something in his face then. Not guilt exactly, but a flicker of the thing that lives just underneath guilt in people who are not quite able to fully feel it. Something that almost looked like he was beginning to understand what he had actually lost. "You were never," he started. "I know what I was," she said. "That's not your information to give me anymore." She turned back to Sandra Okafor, who had been examining a spot on the far wall with professional focus throughout this exchange. "You were saying something about the lighting in the East Corridor," Sophia said. "I was," Sandra said, and they continued. She did not watch Adrian walk away. Lorenzo found her 20 minutes later, and she could tell from his expression that he had seen the exchange from across the room, though he said nothing about it. "How are you doing?" he said. "Completely fine," she said. "I mean that." "I know you mean it. That's why I asked." She looked at him. "That doesn't make any sense. People say they're fine when they're not all the time. I asked because you said it, and I wanted to confirm it was real." "It's real," she said. "It was easier than I expected, emptier." "Because you already finished it," he said. 3 weeks ago, on a sidewalk." She considered that. "Maybe you're right. I usually am," he said. "It's an unfortunate quality." She laughed. Cleanly, actually, for the second time in a month. She was building a habit of laughing with Lorenzo Viscari, and she was not going to apologize for it. The event continued. She had 2 more substantive conversations with Caldwell Foundation contacts and left with a clear path toward a formal proposal. She ate something small and excellent, and stood in a room full of Chicago money and power, and did not once feel like she was there in relation to anyone but herself. At some point in the evening, she became aware that the room had noticed them, her and Lorenzo, the specific combination of them. The fact that Sophia Romano had walked into a room where her ex-fiancé was publicly debuting his new relationship, and had done so beside one of the most significant and quietly feared figures in the city. She heard it in the quality of conversations around her, the drop in volume when she and Lorenzo were near, the particular attention that was paid without being directed. She understood what it looked like from outside. She also understood that it was not what it looked like. Lorenzo had not rescued her. She had not attached herself to his power. They had walked in together because she had wanted company, and the company had been good, and she had spent the evening being herself rather than performing anything. That distinction mattered to her more than anything else about the night. It was Elena who cornered her in the hallway near the restrooms, which Sophia had not anticipated because Elena had spent the entire evening maneuvering to stay on the opposite side of whatever room Sophia was in. She almost walked past her. She might have if Elena hadn't said her name. "Sophia." She stopped, turned. Elena Marsh was still beautiful in the same way she had always been, carefully, effortfully, in the manner of someone who treated appearance as a professional commitment. She was in something dark green that suited her. She looked for the first time in the years Sophia had known her unsure. "I want to explain," Elena said. Sophia looked at her for a moment. "No," she said. "Soph." "Don't call me that," she said quietly and without heat. "You don't get to call me that anymore." Elena's jaw tightened. "I didn't plan it." "I know," Sophia said. "Nobody plans these things while they're in my kitchen eating the food I made. Nobody plans them while they're telling me they're so happy for me. Things just happen over 7 months gradually and completely, and nobody plans any of it." She held Elena's gaze. "I'm not going to scream at you. I'm not going to make a scene tonight. That's not what this is." "I'm sorry," Elena said, and she sounded like she meant it, which was the most complicated part. "I believe you're sorry," Sophia said. "I also believe that if the situation had repeated itself differently, you'd make the same choice. People are sorry about consequences. They're rarely sorry about the decisions that made them." Elena looked at her. "You seem different." "I am different." "Lorenzo Vescari," Elena said. And there was something in the way she said the name, not quite fear, but adjacent to it. "Is a friend," Sophia said. "That's all I owe you on that subject." She walked past Elena and back into the main room, and her hands were not shaking, and her face was composed, and she did not feel the need to find Lorenzo immediately to report what had happened. She knew where he was. She would tell him when she was ready. Right now, she just walked back into the light of the room and breathed and let herself feel exactly what she felt, which was tired and sad. And also underneath that something that she was beginning to recognize as solid. Solid in the way a new floor feels when you've finished it, when you press your foot into it, and it holds without flex, when you finally understand that the structure is complete, and it will bear your weight. She found Lorenzo 20 minutes later, near the edge of a conversation he was extracting himself from with the particular smooth efficiency of someone who had long ago mastered the art of departure. "Ready?" he asked. "Almost," she said. "I need 1 more minute with Sandra Okafor. I'll get the car." She found Sandra near the entrance and confirmed 3 things: the date for a site visit, the budget parameters, the name of the facilities manager she would need to contact. Professional, clean, specific. 2 minutes maximum. Then she went to the car. Lorenzo was inside already, which she had expected. The city moved past the windows in its December dark, and she sat beside him and let the quiet of the car come over her. "Elena stopped me in the hallway," she said. "I saw." "You see everything." "Occupational habit," he said. "How was it?" She apologized. And I told her I believed her and that it didn't matter." Sophia looked at the city moving past. "I thought it would feel like more than it did. When I imagined that conversation, I thought it would feel like the final piece of something, but it just felt like talking to someone I used to know." "Because she is," Lorenzo said. "The person you knew was the performance. When that ended, there wasn't a person left that you had an actual relationship with." She thought about that. "That's a brutal way to put it." "It's accurate," he said. "Brutal and accurate are different things that often look the same." She turned and looked at him in the dark of the car. The city light came through the windows in irregular patterns, and she thought, as she sometimes did now, about the sidewalk outside the Harrington. How she had stood there with nothing, and turned left instead of right, toward the cold instead of back inside, and found this specific person occupying this specific piece of sidewalk. "Lorenzo," she said. "Yes." "I think I'm grateful you were outside the Harrington that night." I was quiet for a moment. "I don't believe in accidents," he said. "But I believe in paying attention to what's in front of you. You were in front of me. I paid attention." "That's simple." "That's simple," he said. She looked back out the window. The city moved past in its ordinary complexity, lights and traffic, and the dark mass of the lake somewhere to the east, invisible but present, enormous and cold, and entirely uninterested in the small human dramas playing out along its edges. Chicago in December, doing what it always did, making no accommodation for anyone's grief or anyone's recovery or anyone's gradual hard-won reconstruction of a life. She was grateful for that too. She was grateful for the city's indifference, which had always been perversely one of the things she loved about it. Chicago did not care what had happened to her. Chicago continued, and in continuing it made clear that she should continue too. She would go to the site visit with the Caldwell Foundation next week. She would send the proposal the week after. She would call Renata Shu and check on the progress of the renovation, and hear about the small triumphs of a floor becoming something new. She would work on the sublet apartment, which was hers in Lincoln Park, with its narrow windows and the print on the wall that had lived in storage for 2 years because it didn't fit someone else's aesthetic. She would continue. The car stopped at her building. She got out. Lorenzo did not follow, which she had not expected and did not need. "Same time next week," she said at the door. "I'll have Marco call," he said. "Lorenzo," she said before she fully turned. He looked at her. "Tonight was important," she said. "Not because of Adrian or Elena or anything to do with any of that. Because I walked into a room and I was just myself, the whole time. I haven't done that in a long time." He looked at her in the quiet of the December street. "You're going to do it every time from now on," he said. "You've remembered how." She went inside. She did not look back, but she heard the car pull away, and she stood in the elevator going up and felt it, that solid feeling, that load-bearing sense of a floor that held, and she let it be there without questioning it, without checking it against anything, without measuring it by any standard except her own. It held. She noticed she had stopped counting the weeks sometime in February, not because the time stopped mattering, but because she had stopped organizing her life around what had happened in November. That was the difference. She used to wake up, and the first thing her brain did was calculate 6 weeks since the Harrington 8 weeks 11, as if the distance from that night was the primary measurement of her existence. And then, one Tuesday morning in February, she woke up thinking about the Caldwell Foundation proposal revision and the site visit scheduled for Thursday, and the call she needed to return from a new client in River North, and she was in the kitchen making coffee before she realized she hadn't done the calculation at all. She stood with her mug and noticed that. Then she went to work. The Caldwell Foundation contract had come through in January, a full redesign of their event space and 2 adjacent rooms. The largest solo project Sophia had taken on since leaving the firm she'd worked at before going independent. It was not Adrian's world that had given it to her. It was Sandra Okafor, who had watched her handle a very specific kind of pressure at a December gala, and had decided that a woman who could do that could probably also handle a complicated renovation with 3 competing stakeholder opinions and a board that changed its mind every 2 weeks. She was right. Sophia could handle it. She had also, by February, added 4 other active clients to her roster. Not enormous projects. Not the kind of budgets that made headlines. But real work, quality work, the kind that generated referrals and photographs she was proud of, and the slow compounding reputation that builds when you are simply very good at what you do without anyone propping the door open for you. Renata HSU's renovation had been completed in January. Renata had stood in the finished space and said nothing for a full minute, just looked, moved through it, slowly touched a surface here and there, and then turned to Sophia and said, "He really was never here." Sophia had taken that as the highest possible compliment. Lorenzo had seen the photographs. She'd sent them without overthinking it the way she sent him things now. Small pieces of her daily life that she thought he would receive well. Not because she needed his approval, but because she had found over months that his responses were consistently the most interesting ones she got. He had written back 3 words. "You did that." No praise inflation, no performance, just the fact stated cleanly. She had read it 4 times. Their relationship had continued to evolve in the particular way of things that don't announce themselves. There was no moment when it became defined. There was just a gradual increase in density. More conversation, more honesty, more of the specific texture of 2 people who had decided without ceremony that the other person's presence in their life was not incidental. He had told her more about himself over time. Not everything she understood, that there were parts of Lorenzo Viscari's life that existed in a register she was not fully part of and might never be, and she had made her peace with that in the same way that she had made her peace with the complexity of him she'd first encountered in the search results. She held the whole picture without needing every piece of it to be comfortable. That was something she had learned about herself in the past few months. She was more capable of complexity than she had previously tested. He had told her about his wife Maria, who had died of cancer 6 years ago, after a marriage of 14 years. He had told her in the same direct, unperformative way he told her everything sitting across a table at the Italian restaurant in River North that had become without either of them officially deciding at their place. He had said, "She was the most honest person I ever knew. Not kind honest. Sometimes they're the same thing, and sometimes they're not, and she always knew the difference." He had paused. "After she died, I stopped expecting to find someone who made me want to be in the same room as myself. I had stopped looking." Sophia had listened without filling the silence. "And then," she had said eventually. "And then I was outside a hotel at the wrong time," he said. "And someone was standing on a sidewalk not crying." She had looked at him across the table in the particular light of that restaurant, and something in her chest had moved, not dramatically, not like a scene from a film, but in the quiet, specific way of something real. She had not said anything immediately. Then, "I wasn't not crying because I was strong," she said. "I was not crying because I hadn't finished understanding what had happened yet." "I know," he said. "That's not why it mattered." "Then why?" "Because you were present in it," he said. "You weren't managing it or performing it. You were just in it, standing in it. I hadn't seen anyone do that in a long time." She thought about that for a long time afterward. About presence as a kind of courage. About the difference between standing in something and constructing a version of yourself that could withstand it. She had always thought of her own emotional life as something to be organized. It had taken losing everything to discover that sometimes the most powerful thing was simply not to run. The first real test of what they were came in March, and it did not announce itself gently. It came in the form of a phone call at 7 in the morning from a journalist named Daniel Reyes at the Chicago Tribune, who introduced himself politely and then said he was writing a piece on Lorenzo Vescari's business interests and wanted to ask Sophia a few questions about her relationship with him and whether she was aware of the scope of his operations. She was still in her apartment, still in the clothes she slept in. Coffee not yet made. "I'm not going to comment on anyone else's business interests," she said. "Ms. Romano, are you aware that Mr. Vescari is currently under investigation by the state attorney's office in connection with—" "I'm going to stop you there," she said. "I'm not a spokesperson, I'm not a source, and I'm not going to help you build a story. If you have questions for Mr. Vescari, I'd contact his office directly." She hung up. Then she sat very still for 60 seconds. Then she called Lorenzo. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he had either been awake already or had been expecting the call. "The Tribune called me," she said. "I know. I was going to call you this morning." His voice was steady. "I'm sorry you were contacted. That was intended to put pressure on me through you, and I should have warned you it was possible." "Is it true the investigation—" "There is an inquiry," he said. "It has been ongoing for several months. It relates to a real estate transaction from 3 years ago that involved people I did business with who subsequently made choices I was not part of and did not know about. My attorneys are handling it. I believe it will be resolved without charges. And if it isn't—" He was quiet for a moment. "Then I will face whatever comes," he said. "That's not something I would ask you to be part of. I want to be clear about that." She pressed her phone against her ear and looked at the wall of her apartment. The print she had hung the first night, bold and slightly chaotic, which was still there and still right. "You should have told me earlier," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have. I was managing it, and I told myself it would be resolved before it became relevant to you. That was a mistake." "You managed me," she said, "like information I needed to be protected from." The silence that followed was heavy. "Yes," he said. "I did. I'm sorry." She appreciated the absence of justification. He didn't explain the calculation or defend the reasoning. He simply acknowledged it. "I'm not going to disappear because things are complicated," she said. But I need you to not do that again. I have spent enough of my life being managed by men who thought they knew what I could handle." "You're right," he said. "It won't happen again." "Good," she said. "Now tell me everything." I told her everything. It took 40 minutes and a second cup of coffee that she made while he talked, pacing her kitchen because she thought better moving. He told her about the real estate transaction, the partners involved, the specific nature of what the inquiry had uncovered, and why his name was attached to it, despite his peripheral role. He was precise and unsparing about both his culpability and his distance from the actual misconduct. She asked questions, real questions, the kind that probed for inconsistency, and he answered all of them. When he was done, she stood in her kitchen and measured what she felt. She felt informed. She felt the specific weight of complexity that came with choosing to be close to someone who existed in a world with real stakes. She felt underneath all of that something that was not fear. "What do you need from me?" she asked. He paused. "Nothing," he said. "I'm not asking you for anything." "I know you're not asking," she said. "I'm offering." Those are different. He was quiet for a long moment. "I need you to continue doing exactly what you're doing," he said finally. "Your work, your life, the things you've built since November. I need none of that to change because of what's happening with me." "It won't," she said. "But I'm also not going to pretend this isn't happening. We don't do that." "No," he said. "We don't." The inquiry became public knowledge in April, a brief item in the Tribune that quoted anonymous sources and confirmed very little, but said enough to start the specific kind of conversation that Chicago did well, which was the conversation about power and who had it and what they'd done to get it. Sophia's name appeared once in a paragraph that described her as Vescari's companion, which was accurate and said nothing. Her phone had 17 missed calls by 10 in the morning on the day the article ran. Former colleagues. Clients she hadn't spoken to in months. 2 people she was actively working with who called to say with varying degrees of grace that they were concerned about her association with Lorenzo and what it might mean for their projects. She returned every call. She was direct in every conversation. She said, "I understand your concern. My work is and has always been entirely my own. If you believe the quality of that work has changed, I'd be glad to discuss it. If you're concerned about association rather than work quality, that's a different conversation, and I understand if you need to make a different choice." 2 clients stayed. 1 did not. She absorbed the loss cleanly. It cost her real money and real professional momentum, and she did not minimize that to herself. But she also did not revise her position. Lorenzo called that evening. "I heard about Marchetti pulling out," he said. "I'm sorry." "It was his call to make," she said. "Sophia, it was his call to make," she said again, not harder, just steadier. "I'm not going to ask you to feel guilty about that. I made my choices with full information. That means I own the consequences. Most people would want me to feel guilty. Most people use guilt as a management tool," she said. "I told you I wasn't going to manage you." He was quiet. Then, in a voice that was slightly different from his usual register, slightly less armored, slightly more direct in the specific way that people are direct when they have run out of the energy required to be anything else. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "This," he said. "What we're doing. I know how to manage. I know how to protect. I know how to make decisions for other people, because I have better information than they do. I don't know how to be in something where I have to hold the other person's cost in my hands and be honest about what it is." She sat with that. "You're doing it right now," she said. "Badly." "Honestly," she said. "Those aren't the same thing." He made a sound that was almost a laugh, the same quality she had been hearing from him for months. That small surprised sound he made when something cut through the armor at an angle he hadn't anticipated. "Maria used to say that," he said. "Brutal and accurate are different." "You told me that," she said. "Back in December." "I know," he said. "It's the same principle." She thought about the woman she had never met, Maria Vescari, who had been honest rather than kind and had known the difference, who had apparently spent 14 years being exactly the person Lorenzo needed, and then left a 6-year absence that no amount of empire building had filled. She thought about what it meant to be the person who came after someone like that. Not replacing, not competing, just being the next true thing. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Not because of the investigation, not because of Marchetti, not because a journalist called me at 7 in the morning. I'm not going anywhere because I'm choosing to be here. Every day. That's how this works for me." He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I know how to protect an empire," he said. "I don't know how to deserve that." "Then we'll figure it out," she said. Together. The investigation concluded in May. Not with charges, his attorneys had been right about that, but with a formal statement from the state attorney's office that declined to pursue the matter further due to insufficient evidence of direct involvement. It was a clean exit legally. Reputationally, it was more complicated the way these things always were, the residue of a story lingering in the public mind, past the point where the facts had been resolved. Lorenzo called her when it was over. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "I saw." "How do you feel about it?" "Relieved," she said. "And also, the same as I did before it was done. That hasn't changed." "What hasn't changed?" "My position," she said. "On you. On this. None of that was contingent on the outcome." Another pause. She had learned to read his pauses the way she read floor plans. The empty space told you as much as what was filled. "I want to see you tonight," he said. "The restaurant," she said. "No," he said. "Somewhere else. I want to take you somewhere I haven't taken anyone in a long time." He took her to the house on the North Shore, where he had lived with Maria, a house she had not known existed, that Marco had driven them to in the long May evening that stood set back from a quiet street behind trees that had been there for decades. It was not what she expected, which was what she should have expected from Lorenzo, who was never what she expected. It was quiet inside. Not cold, someone maintained it, clearly kept it lived in, despite the absence of life, but with the specific hush of a space that was waiting rather than resting. She walked through it beside him and didn't ask questions, because this was not a moment for questions. This was a moment for being present in it with him, which was what he had brought her here to do. He stopped in a room that was clearly a study, books a desk. The residual evidence of someone who had read seriously and thought carefully. "She would have liked you," he said. Sophia looked at him. "Why?" "Because you don't perform," he said. She had no patience for performance. She said she could always tell within 5 minutes whether someone was real, and she was right every time. He paused. "She would have liked you because you're the first person in 6 years who made me put something down." "What did you put down?" He looked at the room, the books, the desk, the long evidence of someone who had been here and was not anymore. "The idea that I had to contain everything," he said. "That the way to be safe after loss was to be sufficient. Self-sufficient, fully managed, no exposure." He turned and looked at her directly. "You made me put that down. I didn't notice it happening until it was already done." She held his gaze. "Lorenzo," she said. "Yes. I know what I feel," she said. "I've known for a while. I wasn't going to say it until it was the right moment, because I've learned the difference between something being true and something being ready to be said." He waited. "I love you," she said. "Not because of who you are in this city, or what you represent, or anything that existed before the sidewalk outside the Harrington. Because of who you are in a conversation. Because of the way you receive hard things without flinching. Because you told me the truth when it was inconvenient and apologized when you got it wrong and didn't use my trust as a shortcut to anything." She paused. "That's why." He looked at her for a long moment. "I have been in love with you," he said, "since you handed me back my coat." She stared at him. "That was the first night." "Yes." "You said nothing." "You had just had your engagement dismantled in a hotel ballroom," he said. "What exactly would have been the appropriate declaration?" She laughed full and real, the kind of laugh that had been increasing in frequency over months, that she associated now entirely with him. "I love you," he said, quieter. "Not carefully or strategically. Not because you filled something empty, Because you are specifically exactly yourself, and that is the rarest thing I have encountered in 52 years of paying close attention." She crossed the distance between them, and it was not a fairy tale moment, not the cinematic sweep of a grand gesture in a significant location. It was just two people in a quiet room choosing each other with full knowledge of what the choice contained. Full knowledge of the complexity and the cost and the investigation that had just concluded, and the client who had walked away, and the 7 months of someone else's lies that had preceded all of this. Full knowledge of a woman named Maria who had been honest rather than kind and was no longer here. Full knowledge of every difficult thing. They chose each other anyway. That was the part that mattered. Adrian Blake saw her in June. It was not arranged, genuinely accidental this time at a corner coffee shop in the West Loop that they had both frequented years ago and apparently still did because people's habits outlast their relationships. He was there when she walked in. She saw him before he saw her. She had a 3-second window to make a decision. She ordered her coffee. He noticed her when she was waiting for it. She watched the same sequence move across his face that had moved across it at the Caldwell Gala in December. The recognition, the recalibration, the involuntary accounting of what he was looking at compared to what he expected to find. But it was more pronounced now, because she was not the woman from the gala either. 6 months further on. 6 months of work and clients and the North Shore house and conversations that lasted past midnight, not because they were afraid to end, but because there was still more to say. "Sophia," he said. "Adrian." He looked at her for a moment. "You look..." He stopped, started again. "You look happy." She considered the word. "Yes," she said. "I think that's accurate." "Is it him?" he said. "Vescari." "Partly," she said. "And partly the work. And partly just getting to be myself without having to fit inside someone else's idea of what I should be." She looked at him directly. "How are you?" How was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that she recognized not from their time together, but from Patricia Blake across a coffee shop table in November. The specific expression of a man who was beginning to understand what he had walked into. "Things with Jeffrey are it's complicated," he said. She thought about what Patricia had said. Jeffrey Marsh is a man who owns the people connected to him. Adrian does not understand that yet. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and she meant it. Not fully, she was human, and there was a small dry satisfaction in the rightness of Patricia's prediction, but genuinely in the larger sense. She didn't want Adrian destroyed. She didn't need his suffering to complete her story. That was the thing she understood now, that she hadn't entirely understood in December at the gala. She wasn't here because of him. She hadn't built any of this in opposition to him. He was simply someone she used to know, standing in a coffee shop, and her life had moved so far past the geography of him that she barely recognized the terrain they had shared. "I hope it resolves," she said. Her coffee was ready. She picked it up. "Sophia," he said before she turned. He stopped. Whatever he had intended to say appeared to require something he couldn't locate. "I didn't appreciate what I had." She looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. "But I did. I appreciated it enough for both of us for 7 years, and then I stopped. And that was the right call." She picked up her coffee. "Take care of yourself, Adrian." She walked out. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt clean, the specific cleanliness of something that has been finished, properly closed without force, set down without ceremony. She stood on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop in the June morning, and drank her coffee, and let the city move around her, indifferent and continuous, doing what it always did. She called Lorenzo from the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. "I ran into Adrian," she said. "How was it?" "Small," she said. "He looked like someone I used to know. The whole thing lasted 90 seconds. "Are you all right?" "Completely," she said. "I want to tell you something." "Tell me." "I have been waiting for the moment when this all felt real," she said. "The life I've been building since November. The work, the apartment, you and me. I kept waiting for it to feel settled, like I'd arrived somewhere. And I just standing here after seeing him, I realized it already feels real. It's been real for a while. I just kept waiting for a signal I'd already received. He was quiet for a moment. Where are you? He said. West Loop, corner of Randolph and Halsted. Stay there, he said. I'll come to you. She stayed. She drank her coffee in the June morning and watched the city move, people with places to be, traffic doing its ordinary thing, the particular energy of Chicago in early summer, when the winter has finally released its grip, and everyone moves a little faster, a little lighter, like something returned to them that they'd forgotten they were missing. She thought about the sidewalk outside the Harrington. November cold, alone with nowhere to go, and a ring she'd left on a bar, and a life she'd constructed around someone who hadn't been worth the construction. She thought about a man who had offered his coat with no expectation of return. She thought about the navy coat she had bought for herself, which was hanging in her own apartment in Lincoln Park, on a hook she had chosen and installed herself. She thought about the print on the wall. Bold and slightly chaotic, 20 years of belonging to her, and finally on a wall that was hers, and Renata standing in a finished room, saying he really was never here, and Sandra Okafor watching her handle impossible pressure at a December gala, and deciding she could handle anything, and her mother saying of course, in the voice she reserved for things she had always known. She thought about Lorenzo's voice at 7 in the morning saying, I should have told you, and then telling her everything completely, because she had asked, and because they did not manage each other. She thought about a room on the North Shore, and I have been in love with you since you handed me back my coat, and the way she had laughed, really laughed in a house full of someone else's loss, and how the laughing hadn't been wrong. It had been exactly right. It had been the sound of two people who had both lost things and chosen to build something anyway. Lorenzo's car appeared at the corner. He got out. He did not hurry. He walked toward her with the same steadiness that had been the first thing she noticed about him. That quality of stillness in motion, of someone who had nowhere more important to be than exactly where he was going. He reached her. He didn't say anything. He simply stood beside her in the June morning on the corner of Randolph and Halsted while the city moved around them. She looked at him. He looked at her. Okay, he said. Better than okay, she said. He took her hand. She let him. They stood there for a moment in the ordinary morning light, holding something between them that did not have a formal name and did not need one. Something built from the specific materials of honesty and difficulty and choice, assembled slowly in the long months between a November sidewalk and a June corner, shaped by every hard conversation and every refusal to manage or perform or pretend. She had walked out of the Harrington with nothing but herself. It turned out that was all she had ever needed to start with. The woman who everyone in that ballroom had waited to see. Break became the woman who never did not, because she wasn't broken, but because she did the breaking herself on her own terms, in a direction she chose, and then she built something from the pieces that was stronger than what had shattered. And the man everyone in Chicago feared became in the specific privacy of her daily life. The man who answered on the second ring and came when she called and stood beside her on an ordinary corner in June like it was exactly where he had always planned to be. Because it was. Because they had both finally chosen something real, and neither of them was ever going to